And mostly these kids will have learned that the world is very unresponsive, it's very harsh, doesn't much give a darn about them, cares if they're out of the way and behaving themselves, but isn't really interested in anything that they're feeling. So if you begin as a child care worker simply to let a child know that that isn't all of the world, that there's a whole other way of being in the world with people that has to do with mutuality and respect and understanding and concern, that's already a tremendous amount. I don't think you could ask anything more than for the child to learn that kind of lesson.
We do have a little girl here whose mother was really having a terrible time trying to take care of herself, much less the child. And the child's very difficult, didn't have language, was autistic in her behavior, had been in therapy for since she'd been 2 years old. This was a child who couldn't play with other children, really didn't interact with adults. Mother was neglecting her at home, not stimulating her, but we kept talking with the mother, being supportive, that if the child could go into a situation where she could develop language, things would be a little easier. She could tell her what she wanted instead of acting it out. And that she wouldn't feel that she had to hit her because she'd have another way. She could talk to her instead. And that's worked just marvelously. The child has learned to talk. She's not talking like she's been talking since birth, but she's talking like a child who's been talking for 6 months. And so that now she visits her mother on weekends, and it's not always perfect, but it's nicer. Most of the time it's nicer.
A good child care center, I think, can do wonders for a child that has had problems before coming to the center. Children begin to feel the warmth and nurturing and caring from other children, from the teachers, the adults in the environment, for many hours a day. Also, a good child care center gives children an opportunity to act out some of the things that have been troubling them. And if the adults in the environment are really warm and caring, the child can do a lot of communication with those people and get reinforcement for their own feelings. They can get demonstration of how appropriate it is to deal with one's own feelings. One of the things that people used to ask me when I worked with kids, well, what was it? What was the technique that you used? Why did this child get better, or why did that child get better? And I used to say, because a little bit of my gut went with each one of them. I'm not sure about the technique, but I can tell you how it felt. And I think that's a real part of it. But when a child can begin to laugh again and begin to love again, that's a pretty rewarding thing.
We're all partners in prevention. Out of our concern for the children, their well-being and their future, we have a mandate to protect them from abuse and neglect. We have an obligation to report suspected child abuse and neglect whenever we encounter it among the children in our care. And we can provide children who have been harmed with relationships that will nurture them and environments that will help them grow. Many resources are available to us in our communities. We have relationships with parents and fellow child care workers. Child care resource and referral services can be particularly helpful. Licensing, law enforcement, and child protective agencies are all there when we need them. All of these are sources of support to call on in our fight for the rights of children.
the flashlight.
I know, it's a baby. She really worked at it for a long time. What are you doing, Caitlin?
Child care is demanding work. Our reward isn't high pay or prestige. It's the satisfaction of doing well something that's important, maintaining a safe, healthy, vital environment for youngsters. And it's the joy of sharing their lives. If a child care worker doesn't love kids, she or he is in the wrong profession. We child care workers play a major role in our society for children and their parents. And we'd like our society to recognize the value of what we do.
We're just not to the point yet where we realize that what I am doing with the children is going to make a difference 10 years in our whole society.
Our children are there sometimes 10 hours a day. And what happens with them during the day and their activities, what kind of food they eat, where they sleep, where they play, what type of individuals are changing their diapers, holding them for their bottles, playing with them, should be prime importance. This is my child, our children, and what happens to them during those hours is going to affect the rest of their lives.
Police are investigating charges that young children were sexually abused and terrorized by a preschool employee. A former worker at a daycare center has been accused of sexually molesting children at the center.
When a child is abused in child care, that's news because it's rare. In fact, most child abuse occurs within the home. It's done repeatedly over a period of time by parents or other adults whom the child knows well. Contrary to the media image, child care workers frequently detect and stop abusive treatment of children. We prevent child abuse from occurring in the home and in child care. Intentional child abuse in child care is rare, but it does occur. Unintentional neglect and abuse happen more often. Both can be prevented. In this program, we'll look at ways to reduce the stresses of our work that can lead to abuse. We'll consider hiring and staff management procedures that can help us avoid problems. And we'll look at methods to discipline children that guide them toward better self-control and take the pressure off the child care worker. When child abuse does occur in child care, it may be because the child care worker is under stress.
Come on, I don't have all day. You don't shape up, you know what's gonna happen to you, don't you? I'll give you a lesson you'll never forget. Get in there.
Sometimes it feels like a real dead-end job because you find yourself doing the same things again over and over and over every day, tying the shoe, getting the bottle warmed, making the bed, sweeping the yard, a lot of maintenance things. But then at the other, that's very demanding physically. And then when you turn around, there's all these emotional demands on you, helping a child when they're crying desperately because their parent has just left. So it's very draining emotionally and physically, bandaging up their scraped knee, but also being able to turn around and give a professional description of your program to a parent who's coming in who may be enrolling their child.
Noise level sometimes can add to stress. Just being able to cooperate with families, all the logistics of taking a field trip, getting parents to be involved as much as you'd like them to be, they don't have the time to be. There's also, you have relationships with children and with adults, so that relationships always bring on stress, and those things just mount up.
It's a kind of job where you have to be on all the time. The entire time you're there, you have to be aware of everything that's going on around you. And while you have a certain amount of control of the situation, you're dealing with 8, 12, 20 little individual bodies there that could be doing anything at any particular time. And day after day after day of that sort of work, it becomes stressful.
who remembers what the owl says? We did the owl all day yesterday.
Me.
What's the owl say? Stress is something that's very much a part of this type of work. When you're here by yourself with 6 children, and they all need something different from you, and all of them at the same time usually, it's never one situation and then everything's calm and then another. It's usually everything comes together at once where everybody demands your attention. And you have to basically go by who needs what first.
We make a chain. We're all connected, aren't we?
Well, we're like a chain, moving like a snake. Yeah, moving like a snake.
We sure are.
At first, when I decided to do it, I had to go through a whole period of time where when I went to a party and said to people, I do family daycare. And someone would look at me like, oh, well, that's very interesting, and turn away and go talk to someone else who was doing something really interesting, like being a lawyer or a doctor or something. That was, I had to really talk to myself and work with myself to say, well, that just is their problem.
Oh, no hitting in the head. Just on the body.
I think sometimes parents forget that this is not an easy job. I think sometimes they need to remember that I am working a job. I'm just not at home kicking back with their kids all day long doing nothing, and I've got all this time to wash my clothes and clean up my house. My house probably stays much junkier than theirs.
Bye-bye. Family daycare has its special stresses. Family daycare providers are usually without any source of outside funding. Licensing requires that they provide a safe, clean, and healthy physical environment, and that helps. But psychologically, many feel isolated from peers and fellow providers. Many who do family daycare have a close relationship with the community they serve. It may be hard for them to define and limit relationships with parents or to bring up sensitive issues.
You find on a one-to-one, people get a little more personal, and they get a chance to sit down and talk with you about their problems. I don't always like to take in the problems of the parents, but I can't help it. It's sort of like, this is what happens. This is a part of family daycare. This is what family daycare is all about.
I'll give you a lesson you'll never forget.
I'm losing it.
I definitely feel the need to talk to adults. You get tired of talking in 1, 2, 3s, ABCs, poo-poo and caca and pee-pee and all the little terminology that we have to use with them. And when I get to that point, if I have a spare minute, I'll pick up the telephone and talk to a friend, just so I can regain my sanity and of who I am and what I'm doing, and then go back with them again.
I'm sure in past years I have put the needs of the children here above my own family or above my own needs, and that's not okay. Fortunately, there are some coordinating agencies in almost every county which hold directors' workshops, which enable us to discuss and find out ways that we can better cope with the stress or the burnout factor. And I have utilized those opportunities more than once.
The way I handle that is by having a very clearly defined contract and heading off a whole lot of problems before the children even come into the program, and being very clear with parents about what I have to offer. And my hope is that if they do not like what I have to offer, and if they do not share my philosophy, that they will take their child somewhere else.
We try and have staff meetings and have social occasions with the staff. We started a bowling club here. We've played baseball with the parents. We have, social type events that help alleviate the stress, and also gives you a chance to sort of take a break from what you're doing and have a minute to smell the roses. That if you look back on what you've accomplished each year, you get a sense of, wow, we did quite a bit, and that's what keeps us going.
After being in childcare for so long, I've set up the program that I don't allow the stress level to build that high. I've had people ask me, well, how can you travel with 15, 18, 20, 3 and 4-year-olds? It's because we just don't get up one morning and say, we're going to the zoo. We start on very small trips, walking trips, then a small bus ride, and we talk about it in school and get them to understand that when you go out in the public, you want to act a certain way because you have to be alert, you have to listen to us. After the process is set in, or I should say the system set in, becomes easy.
You're listening to the Mellow Sound with Easy Rock 95.
I look for somebody who loves children also. She's been fingerprinted. She's been through all the mandatory things that have to be done for her to be an aide in licensing. So, and I find the kids love her. And I think the children are the ones who really let you know if you've got a good person or not.
They should look for qualifications that they would look for if they were putting their child somewhere to be cared for. Is the person patient? Does he like children? Does she like children? How do they handle discipline problems? How do they talk with children? It has to be a child-oriented person, and hopefully one who's, had at least the required amount of experience in working with young children. Just because someone has taught high school for 20 years does not qualify them necessarily for working with very young children.
Finding qualified people to work with children is hard these days, given the shortage of teachers and providers. But the trouble it takes to find the right person is little compared to the damage the wrong person can do. Whether you work in a large center or a daycare home, it's important to be able to trust the people who work with you. Don't just look at a resume. Make sure that licensing gets everything they require, including the fingerprint card and the child abuse index check. That will ensure that the person's background has been reviewed. And it's a good idea to have anybody you're seriously considering spend some time with the children so that you can observe their interaction. While you watch, don't mistrust your intuition.
When we hire staff, we have an extensive interview process. We require that a person who come for the job do an on-floor interview as well as one in front of our board of directors, so we can see them working with the children, and that often is more insightful than any interview you might have with a panel. And we look for warmth with the children, the ability to work with more than one child at a time,